Let's get started. So first of all, thanks for having me here to do the session. Appreciate it. So basically, the topic that we're going to cover today is going to be around extending business tools in Sitecore Experience Commerce 9 and using a data-driven approach. So without any front-end code, basically purely back-end. So cool. Is everybody able to see my screen? All good?
Yeah, I see the first slide.
Okay. So just a bit about me. You might be wondering who this dude is, who's woken everyone up at 10 a.m. So basically, I'm the tech lead and software architect at Red Hot Minute Australia. So Red Hot Minute is basically a digital agency over here in Melbourne, Australia. We mostly do Sitecore, e-commerce, mobile apps. So myself, I'm a Sitecore Commerce MVP. I have a background in digital plus also fintech and startups. You can contact me at my blog, sitepurdue.com. So at our company blog at Red Hot Minute Australia at Medium. So the agenda for today is basically going to be, because I think a lot of people might not have experience with commerce overall. I'm just going to start off with an overview in general of business tools, show you how that works, what kind of functionality is out of the box, and then we'll move on to the commerce view service architecture, which will allow you to extend views to build your own custom views. So then I'll show you how to extend views using commerce plugins, and then how to perform actions on the views, and then we just take a short Q&A afterwards. And also, if anyone has any questions, just stop me while I'm presenting. So I'd rather have it as an interactive session as well. Makes it a bit more interesting rather than me just talking. Okay, so let's just kick it off with business tools. So business tools in Commerce 9 are a bit different from Commerce 8.2 if anyone has worked on that. So in Commerce 9, it's totally separate from the content management interface. So it's a separate Angular app, which is basically Speak 3. And it has a very rich and responsive UI that allows merchandisers and customer service representatives to go in there and manage their catalogs and orders and customers. So how you extend the business tools is using the Sitecore Commerce plugin framework. The business tools itself is hosted as a separate site in IIS or in as your app service. So this is just an overall, so I'm just going to start with a bit of the architecture of business tools. So as a merchandiser, you interact with business tools directly. So you don't have to be logged into Sitecore Content Management. You log into BizFX, it uses Identity Server, which goes into the core database to get your credentials from Sitecore to allow you to perform actions that you're basically, based on the authorization that you have. So once again, the business tools interacts with the commerce authoring role to populate the data in the user interface, to get catalog data, to get order data, to edit and persist commerce entities. And everything that you see in the business tools interface basically is driven by these three indexes, the catalog, customer, and order scope index. So this is just an overview. So BizFX connects to authoring to get the indexes and to write data to the shared commerce databases where the entities are stored, like such as your catalog data and your orders. Okay, so I'll just show you the business tools interface. Let's close this thing. Okay, so once you log into Sitecore, the backend, you'll see this thing over here for business tools. So click on that and you're taken to the separate site for business tools. I mean, you can host it as an, you can have it as an iframe in the same page as well. That's all configurable. So once you land on the business tools, you'll see that you have a couple of different options over here. So this is called the dashboard. So within the dashboard, where most of your time is spent is as a merchandiser, you'd come in here, and this basically has all your catalog data, your catalog, your products, your categories, all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to hop in here and show you around. In this case, I just loaded the Habitat sample catalog. Yep, within a catalog, you can have information about the catalog, categories, and sellable items, which are basically products. So for example, for this category, featured products, you can see a bunch of sellable items over here. So you can basically, drill down all the way to the product level and the variant level. That gives you an idea of the catalog. Apart from that, we also have stuff like the inventory to manage your product inventory. You have pricing, promotions, your orders, customers, any relationships that you have between different products. For example, cross-selling, upselling, all that kind of stuff. And you have this thing called the Entity Composer, and this is used to basically extend your commerce entities. Let's say if you want to add extra properties to a product, for example. So this is just a kind of an overview. Any questions at this point? No? Cool. Okay, so let's jump on to the Commerce View service. So whatever I just showed you there in the business tools, all those views are dynamically generated and they're all data driven. So all this happens using the Commerce View service, which is provided by the Sitecore Commerce plugin, Views plugin. Basically a data-driven mechanism to dynamically create the UI. The main difference with this is the view components are defined on the server side. So in normal MVC, you'd have the view which basically gets the data and then renders that view. So all that logic sits on the client side. But in this case, everything is on the server side. So you actually build commerce plugins and you define the views and the properties that goes in views all in backend code. And the front end basically renders it. So a good thing for backend is like you don't have to write any front end code. So no Angular. So the commerce views interact with the commerce authoring API. You can control basically the authorization for that API independently. So for example, if you have the customer-facing website, that wouldn't be able to interact with this. So it's mostly for back-end business users and merchandisers. So again, you use the plugin architecture to extend the views. And the advantage of this is, number one, it allows you to isolate isolate the view and the logic that goes along with the views together in this functionality. So let's say you have a custom implementation, for example, for orders, for example. You could kind of isolate the view and as well as the business logic into one plugin. And it also makes upgrades very easy. So if you upgrade to a new version of Commerce, your code will still work as it is, because it's all backend. So when you come into the Commerce View service, we'll start off with the concept of composite entity view. So a composite entity view basically represents a page. So for example, the merchandising page that we just saw, that's a composite entity view. And a composite entity view consists of child views. So you have the master view, which is the page itself, and then you have child views, which are the individual UI components that make up the page. So for example, over here you'll see a featured products page. So all these individual tables that you see, for example, summary, entity versions, etc., they're all child entity views that belong to the master view, which is the page. And you can nest at multiple levels. So you could have basically master view, child views, and each child view could even have further child views. You can basically generate a rich kind of UI based on whatever your custom requirements are. So next we'll move on to this concept of an entity view. So an entity view is basically just a POCO class that lets you define a view and a list of properties to go along with that view. And you can also associate child views. So what you can do over here, I might show you some code. So we'll go through a couple of the properties here. Let me just get my pointer. Okay, so basically, most of the things over here are self-explanatory, but I'll go through them in a bit of detail. So for each entity view, the most important thing would be the properties. And these are properties that you want to render out in that view. Other thing is stuff like the display name, display rank, which allows you to set the level at which that view displays. So by default, it's 500. So the lower the display rank, the higher that particular view shows up in that composite view. You have entity ID, which is the ID of that particular entity that the view is supposed to interact with. And then you have entity version, which controls the version of the entity in Commerce that the view corresponds to. And you have stuff like UI hint. So this thing over here. So the UI hint basically allows you to supply parameters to the front end to render your view in a specific way. So there's a couple of things out of the box that it supports, which I'll show you in a bit. So within entity views, you have a list of view properties. So again, a view property has a couple of important things. So for example, display name, the value. So if you had a table, consider, for example, if you had a table, the display name would be the display name of that column, for example, and the raw value would be the value. And you have other stuff like read only, and then you have this thing called a UI type. So similar to a UI hint on the view property has a UI type, and the UI type allows you to render your values based on particular based on the type of properties. Let's say you have a date time, so you can render it as a calendar, for example. Or if you have a string, you can render it as a string. You can render it as a decimal. So there's a bunch of basically values that you can supply, and that controls how that particular value is rendered inside the view. So yeah, UI hint and UI type. So just a couple of examples of UI hints. So for the view, it could be flat, which is what we saw out of the box. It could be a table, it could be a grid, it could be a list. There's a bunch of different values. And for UI types, which is the view properties, they could be things like string, boolean, datetime. And you can even inject your own HTML into a particular field. So let's say you want to style a particular field, make it bold, italic, you can just inject your own HTML. There's a really good blog post by Andrew Sutherland, who works with Sitecore over here in Melbourne. He's really listed down all the possible UI hints and UI types that are available to you, because otherwise you'd have to go into the code and actually decompose stuff to find this stuff out. So do visit this to get like a complete list. So before we jump on into how to create plugins for extending views, just to give you a background on Commerce Engine plugins in general for those who haven't worked a lot with Commerce. So the plugin architecture basically allows you to modify the out-of-the-box functionality of Commerce. And the main building blocks are commands, pipelines, blocks. So commands basically run a pipeline. A pipeline basically consists of blocks. So it's very similar to the concept of pipelines in Sitecore. The only difference over here is in Commerce, you define your pipelines and blocks inside code instead of in configuration. So the first thing I'll show you is how to add your own dashboard pane. So how you do this is basically you would define a custom pipeline block. So in this case, for example, we have a get sandbox navigation view block. And in this particular block, what you do is you create an entity view, the stuff we saw before. So for example, in this case, we create a sandbox entity view. You supply a name, ID, and an icon. So once again, there's a set of icons you can use. I'll send you guys a link where you can find out, what icons are available. So you can set the look and feel. So once you add the view, you basically add it to this particular entity view over here, which is the master, which is a navigation view. And how you wire this up is you hook into the BizFX navigation pipeline. So everything in commerce basically, everything boils down to pipelines and blocks. So if you want to do any customization, all you have to do is look at the out-of-the-box plugins and, for example, see which pipeline that you need to hook into, and then you can add your custom blocks. So in this case, the navigation on the business tools is provided by this thing called BizFX navigation pipeline. So what I've done is, after it gets the navigation view block, I've added my own get sandbox navigation view block, which was the one that you saw over here. So just to give you an idea of how this is being done under the ground. So if you go into Chrome, look in your developer tools, you'll see that when you open the main page for business tools, you will see all these calls being made. So at this call, it gets the navigation view, and the navigation view basically returns all the navigation components that the view needs to render. So after adding our particular plugin, you can see that we have a sandbox view. So all of these are out of the box, and this has created a custom dashboard. So just to show you in action, if you go back to the business tools interface, you'll see that you have all the out-of-the-box navigation over here, and then we have this new navigation that we've created called sandbox. So the code that I showed you, at that point, there's no view on that. So I'll show you how to add views to that particular dashboard as well. So you can see sandbox. I've added a sample view over here. I'll show you how to do that later. So just to give you a feel of how the code looks over here. So this is, when you install Commerce, you get an SDK, which comes with some sample plugins and some sample functionality. So most of this stuff is out of the box. So I've created an extra plugin for that sandbox dashboard. So just to give you an idea of the structure of the particular plugin. So this is one plugin. You have your pipelines and your blocks. So in this case, we're not creating a new pipeline. We're just hooking into an existing pipeline. So you just have blocks over here. You have policies, and then you have the configuration. So at the core of every plugin, you're going to have all of these things. So in the configuration, that's where you basically wire up your pipelines and your blocks. In this case, goes right into here. So this is what I showed you earlier, the navigation view block, and being configured over here. Any questions? Good so far?
Rameez, is it possible to make the BizFX control like editable from the user side?
So you mean from a business user's perspective?
Yes. Suppose I have a child entity view inside my orders or something like that, and I want to edit some of the fields and so that it will go and update the database. in the backend.
Yep.
Is it possible to do it?
So you mean is it possible for a business user to actually delete and add fields from a view or to edit fields?
Yeah, edit fields actually.
So
In the
business
visa
user,
function. Yeah.
once you extend the functionality, this is all in code. So you have to create a plugin to add custom fields. Once the custom fields are there, you can persist those entities. So business users can go in and edit those entities, and you can persist them. So probably in the next couple of slides, I have an example. So there's a sample notes plugin over here, which I'll go through that allows you to do that. But apart from that, there's also something called the Entity Composer, and that allows business users to extend entities themselves. So they can basically, for example, for a product or a sellable item, they can go and say, I want these extra fields. So let's say I have a phone. So I can add attributes to that phone, like color, brand. So business users can do that using the Entity Composer. If we get time, I'll show you guys how to do that as well.
Okay. Thanks, Rameez. Yeah.
No worries. So basically, in terms of views, you can basically configure it inside your plugins, whether you want to add particular views or remove particular views. So all of the commerce out of the box functionality is basically built in plugins. So if you look at the commerce DLLs, right, you'll see stuff like Sitecore Commerce catalog plugin, inventory plugin, etc., etc. So the architecture is the same. So the custom plugins you build are basically the same as commerce is built on. So you can, which that basically allows us to modify any of the out of the box pipelines. You can replace blocks, you can add blocks, you can remove. So the syntax is simple. Like for example, in this, we're getting an entity view, and we're removing the standard order summary block, and we're adding on custom block. So this allows you can even totally replace particular views within a composite view, and you can extend them as well. So next is, so once you have the concept of entity view, the second concept is entity action. So you can have a view, but you can also have a view that allows users to perform an action on the components of that view. So when you're interacting with data and views, there's basically a couple of sequence of steps. So when you open a composite view, or any view for that matter, it renders all the available actions for that view. And this is all configured in code, which I'll show you. So once the actions are rendered, when a user clicks on a particular action is just a button. So when the button gets clicked, the user interface basically gets the edit view for the action. So it could be a modal window. So for example, it opens up a pop-up and it shows you the fields that the user can edit. And then basically you can edit those fields and they can hit save, and that completes an action. So you can basically allow stuff like you can add entities, delete entities, edit entities, all that kind of stuff using entity action. Or you can do even more interesting stuff. So that you could have a scenario, for example, where you have a customer view, and you can add your own custom action to say, for example, to send an email to that customer. So it would hook under the same kind of architecture. So when the button gets clicked in your backend code, what you will do is it'll pass the customer to you. You can get the details of that entity, and you can perform any action like sending an email. Recording. So the main building blocks of entity action are the get view block, which is what we saw for the dashboard as well. And then you have the populate actions block, which basically populates the actions for that particular view. And then you have the do action block. And this block basically performs the action on that particular view. So I think I have these in my slides as well. I think I'll go straight to the demo. So you can use the slides as a reference later on. Close this. Okay, so for example, let's close this one. So we have another sample plugin called Sample Notes. So what this is doing is to all your sellable items, which are your products, it's extending them by adding a notes view to it. So if you just go back to all those building blocks that I just showed you, the first step is getting the view block. So we'll just see how it's configured. So you configure the get view block, the populate action block, and then the do action. So we'll just jump into get view. So in this case, what we're doing is we're rendering another table to allow you to add nodes to a particular product. So there's a couple of things you need to do. You need to do your standard checks. So what you receive in this block is basically an entity view. So basically, every request to the commerce authoring API or this particular pipeline is going to go through all of your plugins. So you have to do checks to make sure that you're only performing actions on the views that you want to perform them on. So in this case, for example, we want to perform them on a sellable item only. We don't want to basically add this particular view to any other entity, let's say, for example, like customer entity. So this is where we're basically doing these checks over here. So it's checking whether the entity that we're dealing with is a sellable item, whether it's a variant or whether it's a product. And then based on that, it's basically generating the entity view over here. So in this case, we have, again, the name of the entity view, the display name, and the entity ID. So this thing is really important. The entity ID is basically the ID of the commerce entity that view is related to. So in this case, it would be a sellable item, which is a product. So it knows basically, which product or which entity needs to render. And then you also have entity version because Commerce supports versioning as well. So you could have multiple versions of the same entity. So once you build your view, you add it to your main view over here. And then you add properties to your view. So in this case, what we're saying is, to this particular view, I want to add two properties. One is called the warranty information, and one is called internal notes. And you can see it's you can specify stuff like whether it's a required field. You can specify things like how you want to render them. So in this case, I think it's rendering it as an HTML. Yeah. So that's the first part. Any questions around this? No? Okay, so the second thing, go back here. So once you have the view, the second thing is you want to populate the actions for that view. So when that view pops up on the UI, in order to populate actions, basically similar thing. So you create the populate actions block. And what this block does is it creates something called an entity action view. So in the entity action view, you supply the text for that particular view. So for example, if it's a button, when the user hovers over the button, what kind of text you want to show them, whether that particular button is enabled or not, and what kind of icon that button should have. So a really important thing over here is the name. So you'll see that it has this name called edit notes. So when you create an action, basically, you need to assign a name to that. So later on, when we do the action, it's able to identify which action was triggered. So which is the next step, for example. So once the user clicks on that action, it goes over here into the do action. And you can see over here the first check it does is it only proceeds if the correct action was invoked. So that particular action that we created for that view had a name called edit notes. and this is what it's checking over here. So if the action isn't edit nodes, it returns because it knows it's dealing with something else of that particular action. If it is, it proceeds. So within this action, you can pretty much do anything you want. You have the entity. So in this case, it's a product. So we're taking the product over here. We're taking the custom fields that the user has updated. So in this case, the warranty information and the internal nodes. And then we're persisting it into the database. So basically, a user can go in, edit those properties, and they'll be saved to the database. So I'll just show you this in action as well. Okay. Hopefully this thing loads up. Okay, so we just go to some, since that view and those actions are added to all products, we can go to any one of them. So for example, we'll just go to this particular sellable item. And these are all standard out-of-the-box views like summary, relationships. So we should see a view for notes. So this is the one that we just added, the custom view. So this should display any notes for that product, which there aren't at the moment. And this thing basically is the action that we attached. And you can see, like, when you hover above it, it shows you the text for that action as well. You can add multiple actions. That's all, configurable. In this case, you can see it's grayed out. You can't edit it. That's because we have this concept of an entity version. And once an entity is published, you can't edit it. So we have to create a new version of that particular entity. Once you create the new version 2, everything should be visible again. So let's go to notes. So when you click on that edit action, this is the view it shows up. So if we go back to the code over here inside the get notes view block, you'll see that there's a check over here. So if it's not an edit view, it basically renders that view. This is on the actual sellable item. Otherwise, it basically adds all those properties. So if we go back over here, so let's just say warranty information 1 year. That's the notes. Once you click on OK, basically you're going to go back into your do action edit notes block, and then it's going to persist that particular entity with that with those extra components. Something didn't work. I'm just going to try to publish this and see if it works. Okay, so now you can see that in your notes, you have the warranty information and internal notes. So if you go database now to your Commerce Share database, you'll see an extra component for notes attached to the little item. Ooh, any questions? Nope. Okay. So I think we're almost towards the end. Just a couple of tips over here. So Postman is your friend. You want to use that a lot. So out of the box in the Commerce SDK, there's a Postman collection. So, a lot of people have questions like, how do I know which pipeline that I need to modify or extend? How do I know which block I need to add? So the best place to get started is to use this basically endpoint called get registered pipelines. And that shows you all the registered pipelines for commerce. So for example, we've added that sandbox view. So you'll see that, what the sequence of the blocks are in a particular pipeline. So you basically find out, exactly what's happening underwater. And the second thing, dot peak, that's your best friend. So what you always want to do is just decompile the Sitecore out of the boss plugins and then see how things are being done. So let's say if you want to extend the customer view or the order view, so just open the Sitecore Commerce Orders plugin and decompile it. Basically, you have tons of information there and how to do stuff, and like at which point you want to plug in your particular blocks. And lastly, you want to explore. There's a lot of good commerce blogs. There's an e-commerce channel on Slack, and Sitecore, Stack Exchange, of course. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me as well. I think that's about it. So any questions? Anything you didn't understand or needs more clarification?
It sounds like there's no questions for now.
Okay.
So if anyone has any questions, Rameez's information is up on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to him. Rameez, thank you so much for the session, and thank you for taking the time and to get on this session with us and explain everything. It was a really good session, and we're going to be sharing the recording of the session shortly on our YouTube channel. So thanks, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And yeah, reach out to me if you have any questions. Just ping me on Slack or on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you.